Michael Torres pushed open the front door that Saturday night at 11 and froze. The house sat in silence, a silence so complete it felt wrong, impossible with three 4-year-old boys who
Good
treated
morning,
quiet
my
like a
love.
personal enemy.
Morning, Mommy.
Good
His mother
morning,
Rosa
everyone.
occupied the couch, her expression hovering somewhere between amused and deeply moved, a combination he'd never seen her wear in all his 35 years. He dropped his hospital bag by the door, the weight of 16 hours in the ER still pressed against his shoulders, but confusion sharpened his senses now. "Where are the boys, Mom?" Rosa's smile carried secrets. "Go check your room." His heart kicked against his ribs as he walked down the hallway. The floorboards creaked under his weight, familiar sounds in a house that suddenly felt foreign. He reached his bedroom door and hesitated, hand on the knob, then turned it slowly. What he saw stole the air from his lungs. Victoria Ashford, CEO of Ashford Healthcare Network, billionaire owner of the 7-hospital system where he worked, the woman whose face appeared on magazine covers and business news segments, lay on his bed, her arms wrapped around his 3 sons. All 4 of them slept deeply. Dried tears marked tracks down Victoria's face, but her lips curved in a smile he'd never witnessed during their months of therapy sessions, a smile that spoke of peace, of discovery, of coming home to a place she didn't know existed. Michael stood paralyzed in the doorway. His brain struggled to process the impossible scene. His boys, Ethan, Liam, and Noah, curled around Victoria like she belonged there, like this was normal, like they'd done this 1,000 times before, instead of never. "What the hell?" The words came out barely louder than breath. To understand how Victoria Ashford ended up in that bed required stepping back 14 months to the moment when Michael's world had collapsed into a black hole of grief and responsibility. Sarah had been everything: his wife, his partner, the mother who knew instinctively how to calm Ethan's fears, decode Liam's quiet needs, redirect Noah's boundless energy. 6 months. That's all the cancer had given them between diagnosis and the end. Aggressive ovarian cancer that moved through her body like wildfire, consuming everything beautiful and leaving only ashes. Michael had been in surgery when Sarah died, an emergency appendectomy on a 12-year-old boy, a routine procedure that should have taken 90 minutes. By the time he'd scrubbed out and checked his phone, Sarah was gone. His mother's voicemail had been clinical, protective. "Michael, you need to come home now." He'd driven through Boston traffic in a daze, running 2 red lights he didn't remember, parking crooked in his own driveway. The hospice nurse met him at the door with kind eyes that confirmed everything. Sarah had slipped away peacefully, she'd said. The boys had been at preschool. Rosa had been holding her hand. "I wasn't there when she needed me most." Michael had whispered it to Sarah's still warm hand, and the guilt had embedded itself in his chest like shrapnel, small pieces of it working deeper every day since. 14 months later, he functioned on a routine so precise it felt like machinery. Wake at 5:30, shower while the coffee brewed, prepare breakfast while Ethan, Liam, and Noah engaged in their morning ritual of fighting over toys, bathroom space, and who got to sit in the middle chair. Drop them with Rosa, who'd moved into the house the week after Sarah's funeral and transformed the guest room into a permanent residence. Work 12-hour shifts at St. Grace Medical Center. Return home with just enough energy to play dinosaurs or build block towers before bedtime. Repeat. No breaks. No time to process his own grief. No space to imagine the future. Not when 3 lives depended on him being whole, even though inside he'd shattered into pieces he didn't know how to reassemble. The boys asked about Sarah constantly in those early months. "When is Mommy coming home from the stars?" They'd created their own mythology around death, one Rosa had encouraged with gentle stories about Sarah watching over them from heaven, keeping them safe, loving them forever. Michael had learned to smile when they needed joy, to project strength when they needed security, to hide in the shower when the crying came, because three little faces couldn't see their father break. He'd learned to function on autopilot, moving through days without truly living them, existing in survival mode that stretched ahead for years. 14 more years until the boys graduated high school, longer until they were truly independent, forever until the guilt stopped gnawing at him. Rosa watched him with worried eyes. One evening, 3 months after Sarah's death, she'd cornered him in the kitchen. "Michael, you need help. You need someone." He'd gripped the edge of the counter. "Mom, I had someone. She's gone." "Sarah would want you to live again." "I am living. For them." He gestured toward the living room where the boys crashed toy cars together, their laughter a sound that somehow made the silence in his chest louder. But Rosa was right. He wasn't living. He was surviving, and there was a difference that grew more pronounced as months accumulated. While Michael Torres navigated his grief-soaked existence in a modest 2-story house in Boston's middle-class suburbs, Victoria Ashford occupied a different universe entirely. Her corner office on the 47th floor of one financial center featured floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city like a kingdom. She arrived each morning at 6:30, fresh from a 4:45 workout that left her muscles burning and her mind sharp. The first meeting started at 7. The last often didn't end until 8 at night. 12 to 14-hour workdays, 6 days a week. Sunday mornings were technically off, but her laptop remained open on the kitchen island of her penthouse, emails demanding attention even during the few hours she allowed herself to pretend at rest. The penthouse itself sprawled across 4,000 square feet of minimalist design, all clean lines and expensive emptiness. White walls, gray furniture, abstract art that cost more than most people's houses. It echoed when she walked through it. Every footstep announced her solitude. Dinner followed a pattern. Take out sushi from the same upscale place, eaten at the marble kitchen island while she reviewed quarterly reports or prepared for the next day's negotiations. The city sparkled beyond her windows, millions of lives unfolding in those lights, and Victoria sat alone in her tower, surrounded by luxury that felt increasingly like a very expensive prison. "I built a $2.3 billion empire. Why does it feel like nothing?" She'd spoken the words aloud one night, her voice absorbed by the vast space, without even an echo to acknowledge the question. The panic attack started 8 months ago, though Victoria had ignored the first few, dismissing them as stress, caffeine overconsumption, lack of sleep. During a board meeting, her heart had suddenly raced out of control, her chest constricting like someone was tightening a vice around her ribs. Air became impossible to find. The room tilted. She'd excused herself with admirable composure and locked herself in the executive bathroom for 20 minutes, gripping the marble sink while her body betrayed her. "Just stress," she told her reflection. "Meditate more. Breathe deeper. Work smarter." But the attacks returned with increasing frequency. 2, then 3 times a week. No warning, no apparent trigger. She'd be reviewing contracts or leading strategy sessions or simply riding the elevator, and suddenly her body would rebel, convinced it was dying even though every medical test came back clean. The attack that changed everything happened in a hospital hallway. Victoria had been touring St. Grace Medical Center, one of the 7 facilities in the Ashford healthcare network, when the familiar tightness seized her chest. She'd managed to duck into an empty corridor before the full force hit, but found herself hyperventilating against the wall, vision tunneling, convinced this time was different, this time was real, this time she was actually dying. Michael Torres found her there. He'd been heading to his office after a consult, turned a corner, and discovered the most powerful person in the hospital network gasping for air like a drowning woman. His training kicked in immediately. Calm, professional, he'd approached with steady hands and a voice that cut through her panic. "Ms. Ashford, I need you to breathe with me. In through your nose for 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 4. Out through your mouth for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. He'd guided her to his office, sat her down, talked her through the attack with a competence that felt like a lifeline. When her breathing finally normalized, when the terror receded enough for thought to return, Victoria found herself staring at this doctor whose nameplate read, Dr. Michael Torres, Psychiatry. "This isn't just stress," he'd said, his dark eyes holding hers with uncomfortable directness. "You're experiencing panic disorder. Untreated, it will destroy you." Victoria's walls snapped back into place. "I don't need therapy. I need to work harder." No. His contradiction held no apology. "You need help. Real help. This won't stop on its own." She'd walked out that day fully intending to ignore his advice, but 3 days later, another attack hit during a critical investor call, and Victoria found herself unable to breathe, unable to function, unable to maintain the iron control that had defined her entire life. She'd called Dr. Torres's office and asked for an appointment. The therapy sessions began quietly, secretly, Tuesday and Thursday evenings after hours, unlisted on any schedule. No billing, no records. Victoria couldn't risk anyone knowing the invincible CEO was falling apart. Michael had agreed to the arrangement with the same professional calm he'd shown in that hallway. For the first month, Victoria maintained her armor. She answered his questions with corporate precision, deflecting anything too personal, treating therapy like a business meeting that required her participation but not her vulnerability. Michael waited. He asked probing questions about happiness, fulfillment, purpose. He listened to her describe her empire with the detached observation of someone studying a specimen. The breakthrough came during their 6th session. Victoria had arrived directly from a 14-hour day, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. Michael had asked a simple question. "When was the last time you felt truly happy?" Victoria opened her mouth to answer and found nothing there. The silence stretched. Minutes passed. Michael didn't push. Finally, she'd whispered the truth. "I don't remember. Maybe never?" The admission cracked something open. Words started flowing about the pressure of being William Ashford's granddaughter, the weight of expectations, the constant need to prove herself worthy of the empire she'd inherited. About reaching 40 years old with no husband because she'd never found someone who wanted her rather than her money. About postponing children year after year, too early, career to consolidate, there's time, always more time, until suddenly there wasn't. Every birthday I tell myself, next year. But next year never comes. Victoria's hands trembled in her lap. I'm 40. No husband, no children, no family except my mother who only calls to criticize my choices. What would make you feel whole? Michael's question cut to the core. For the first time in years, Victoria cried. I don't know. That's what terrifies me. Michael maintained professional boundaries despite finding himself drawn to her intelligence, her hidden vulnerability, the glimpses of the woman beneath the CEO armor. He told himself it was simple attraction, nothing actionable. She was grieving a life never lived. He was grieving the life he'd lost. Those parallel griefs couldn't build anything sustainable, but the sessions continued. Victoria slowly peeled back layers, revealing depths of loneliness that mirrored Michael's own. And Michael, despite his determination to remain clinical, found himself sharing more than he intended. About Sarah, about the boys, about the guilt that colored everything. They were both drowning in different oceans, and somehow, in that therapy room, they'd found someone who understood what it meant to be unable to breathe. The Saturday afternoon that shattered both their carefully controlled worlds began with Victoria alone in her penthouse, drowning in the worst panic attack she'd experienced in months. Her chest felt like it was collapsing inward. Air wouldn't come. The room spun. Her heart hammered so violently she could feel it in her throat, her fingertips, behind her eyes. This wasn't the usual panic. This was terror so complete it erased everything else. But underneath the physical symptoms ran a more terrifying thought. I'm going to die alone in this apartment, and no one will find me for days. The penthouse walls closed in. The vast space became a tomb. Victoria grabbed her phone with shaking hands, pulled up emergency services, finger hovering over the call button. Instead, inexplicably, she found herself scrolling to Michael's contact. Not to call. She couldn't explain what she needed because she didn't understand it herself. She just needed to move, to escape, to go somewhere that wasn't this beautiful prison. She grabbed her keys and ran. The drive to Michael's house existed in her memory as fragments, traffic lights, turns made on autopilot, the GPS voice guiding her to an address she'd never visited but had somehow memorized from his patient file. A middle-class neighborhood where modest houses sat close together, where toys littered front yards and basketball hoops hung over garage doors. Victoria parked crooked at the curb and sat, gripping the steering wheel, her breathing still irregular, her hands still shaking. What was she doing here? Michael wasn't even home. She knew his Saturday schedule, knew he'd be at the hospital until late. This made no sense. But the panic pushed her out of the car, up the cracked concrete walkway, to a front door painted forest green. She rang the bell before she could reconsider. Rosa Torres opened the door and saw an elegant woman in designer clothes, clearly out of place in this neighborhood, with red-rimmed eyes and ragged breathing. "Can I help you?" Victoria's voice came out smaller than intended. "I'm Victoria. I work with Michael at the hospital. Is he here?" "He's on call. Won't be back until late tonight." Rosa studied her with the sharp assessment of someone who'd raised children and recognized distress in all its forms. "But please, come in. You don't look well." Victoria should have declined, should have thanked her and left, should have returned to her penthouse and called her actual therapist, or gone to the emergency room, or done literally anything except enter her psychiatrist's home uninvited. But before she could speak, 3 identical boys barreled into the hallway behind Rosa, stopping short when they saw the stranger at the door. 3 pairs of the same dark eyes studied her with unfiltered curiosity. "Who are you?" one asked. Victoria's professional mask activated automatically. "I'm Victoria, your daddy's friend." "You're pretty," another observed with 4-year-old directness. The third was already reaching for her hand. "Come play with us." And Victoria, who'd spent decades building walls, who'd mastered the art of saying no to anything unproductive, who lived by a schedule planned to the minute, simply let herself be pulled into the house by 3 boys who didn't know she was a billionaire and wouldn't have cared if they did. The playroom occupied what had probably once been a formal dining room. Toys scattered across every surface, building blocks, plastic dinosaurs, matchbox cars, picture books stacked in precarious towers. The chaos should have triggered Victoria's need for order. Instead, something in her chest loosened. Rosa appeared with water and cookies. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything. Her exit felt like permission, like acknowledgement that whatever brought Victoria here, she was safe to stay. I'm Ethan, the first boy announced, with the authority of someone who'd emerged from the womb 2 minutes before his brothers. He's Liam, and he's Noah. It's nice to meet you. Victoria sat on the floor. When was the last time she'd sat on the floor? And accepted the blocks Ethan thrust at her. We're building a castle for Mommy in the stars, Ethan explained, his small hands already stacking plastic blocks with intense concentration. Victoria's throat tightened. Your mommy is in the stars? Grandma says she watches over us from heaven, Liam added, his voice quieter than his brother's, his eyes more watchful. Noah brought over a fleet of toy cars. Do you like dinosaurs? Yes, I like dinosaurs. Victoria realized her panic had receded. Her heart still beat too fast, but she could breathe. The tightness in her chest had loosened. For the first time in hours, she wasn't actively drowning. The afternoon unfolded in a way Victoria had never experienced. The boys changed the construction rules every 5 minutes, and she followed without question. Noah insisted she provide voices for various vehicles, and she found herself making ridiculous engine sounds that prompted delighted giggles. Liam showed her drawings he'd made that week, waiting patiently for her to study each one and offer genuine observations. Hours passed. Victoria didn't think about quarterly reports or board meetings or the 3 contracts waiting for her signature, didn't mentally rehearse Monday's presentation or worry about the competitor trying to poach her best surgeons. She was completely, entirely present, laughing at the boys' nonsensical jokes, building elaborate structures that immediately got demolished, being pulled from one activity to another by 3 inexhaustible sources of pure energy. Ethan showed her a crayon drawing that made Victoria's chest ache. 5 figures, a tall man labeled Daddy, 3 small boys, an older woman marked Grandma, and a conspicuous empty space beside the father figure. What's this space for? Victoria traced the blank area with one finger. Ethan's answer came with the simplicity of truth. For when Daddy finds someone to be happy with again. Grandma says one day he'll find someone and won't be sad anymore. Victoria stared at the drawing. These 3 boys had lost their mother before they could even form lasting memories, but they still believed in happy endings. Their father raised them alone while carrying his own grief, yet somehow he'd taught them to hope. Should we watch a cartoon? Liam suggested as the afternoon light shifted toward evening. Grandma lets us if it's just for a little while before dinner. They piled onto the small couch in the playroom, all 3 competing for space in Victoria's lap. She turned on the television to the channel they indicated. The show made no sense to her. Loud colors, incomprehensible plot, characters that defied physics. But the boys watched with rapt attention, occasionally shouting excited commentary at the screen. Victoria held them, feeling the warm weight of their small bodies, the trust with which they leaned against her, the way Noah's hand found hers and gripped tight. Something fundamental shifted inside her chest, like tectonic plates realigning after years of pressure. She understood suddenly what months of therapy had been trying to show her. The emptiness wasn't about professional achievement, wasn't about lacking recognition or accolades. It was the absence of exactly this, genuine human connection, the warmth of people who accepted her without demanding anything in return, the profound experience of mattering to someone for reasons that had nothing to do with her net worth or business acumen. When the cartoon ended, all 3 boys had heavy eyelids and slow movements. Aren't you going to have dinner? Victoria asked. We're sleepy, Ethan yawned. Liam's hand tugged at her sleeve. Will you stay with us until we fall asleep? Please, Noah added with 4-year-old earnestness that made refusal impossible. Victoria looked toward the door, thinking about leaving, about thanking Rosa for the hospitality and returning to her carefully controlled existence. But something stronger than logic made her nod. She followed them upstairs to the room they shared, a space filled with bunk beds and scattered toys and drawings taped to the walls. When they pointed to their father's bedroom down the hall and asked if they could sleep in the big bed because it was bigger and more comfortable, Victoria didn't refuse. Michael's room was simple. A queen bed with a worn quilt, a dresser with framed photos, a beautiful woman with kind eyes holding 3 babies, the same woman laughing at a beach, a wedding photo that showed Michael and his bride impossibly young and blazingly happy. Sarah, the wife who'd died and left him drowning. The boys climbed onto the bed and patted the space between them. Victoria lay down, and immediately 3 small bodies arranged themselves around her, Ethan on her left, Liam on her right, Noah sprawled across her middle. They burrowed against her like puppies seeking warmth. Liam's hand found hers and held tight. Noah's arms wrapped around her waist. Ethan rested his head on her shoulder. As their breathing slowed and deepened, as sleep claimed them with the swift totality of childhood, Victoria felt tears flowing. Not panic tears, not the frustrated tears she'd shed in therapy. These were tears of relief, of recognition, of gratitude for stumbling into this house and finding something she'd searched for her entire life without knowing where to look. She'd come seeking air and found family, come seeking escape and found purpose, come seeking nothing and found everything. Her own eyes grew heavy. The warmth of the boys, the safety of this ordinary room, the profound peace of being needed for reasons that had nothing to do with power or money. It all combined to pull her toward sleep. She fought it briefly, thinking she should leave before Michael returned, but exhaustion won. Victoria's last conscious thought was how perfectly right this felt, how completely wrong her entire life had been until this moment. When Michael opened his bedroom door 4 hours later and found his CEO sleeping in his bed surrounded by his sons, the universe tilted on its axis. He stood in the doorway long enough for his brain to cycle through shock, confusion, concern, and something he couldn't quite name. Victoria Ashford, the woman who commanded hospitals with ice-cold efficiency, who appeared on financial news networks discussing profit margins and healthcare innovation, looked younger in sleep, vulnerable, her face relaxed in a way he'd never seen during their therapy sessions. The boys had positioned themselves around her like she was a treasured prize they'd fought over and agreed to share. Ethan's hand rested on her arm, Liam curled against her side. Noah had somehow ended up partially on top of her, face buried against her shoulder. Michael's first instinct was protective. Get her out, don't wake the boys, figure out what happened. But then Victoria's eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light from the hallway. When she focused on him standing there, she didn't startle or show embarrassment. She simply smiled. Small, tired, genuine. He gestured for her to extract herself, pointing at the sleeping boys. She nodded, understanding, and began the delicate process of unwinding 3 sets of limbs without waking their owners. Michael approached to help, carefully lifting Noah enough for Victoria to slide her arm free, then steadying Ethan as she shifted. Liam stirred, but didn't wake when she eased away from him. They tiptoed out like co-conspirators, closing the door with painstaking care. In the hallway, standing face to face in the semi-darkness, silence stretched between them. Michael expected an explanation. Victoria searched for words. Then she did something that completely disarmed him. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a hug that had nothing to do with social niceties or professional courtesy. This was the embrace of someone barely holding herself together, someone who needed human contact to prove she still existed. Michael recognized it because he'd given and received this exact hug in the months after Sarah died. The desperate grip of someone reminding themselves they were still alive. His arms came up automatically, returning the embrace, and they stood there for a long moment while Victoria trembled slightly, and Michael tried to understand what had happened in his house today. When they separated, Victoria wiped her eyes quickly. "Thank you." The words came out barely louder than breath. "For what?" Michael kept his voice low to avoid waking the boys. "For everything. For the afternoon, for them, for this." "Victoria, I don't know what happened here, but you don't need to thank me." "I do." Her eyes met his, and he saw raw emotion there that she'd never shown in therapy. "You don't understand. I need to." Rosa appeared at the top of the stairs and caught his eye, signaling that tea waited in the living room. She disappeared back downstairs with the tactical wisdom of someone who knew when to give people space. Michael and Victoria descended the stairs and settled on the couch while Rosa served steaming cups before announcing she'd be watching television in her room. The door closed, leaving them alone. Michael waited. He'd learned in his psychiatric training that silence was often more powerful than questions. People filled silence with truth when given the chance. Victoria held her mug with both hands, staring into the liquid like it held answers. "I had an attack this afternoon. A bad one. I was home alone and the panic came out of nowhere. It always does, but this time was different. It wasn't just fear of dying or fainting. It was fear of continuing to live the way I've been living." She paused, gathering courage. "And in the middle of the attack, the only thing that came to mind was coming here. I didn't think, didn't plan. I just came." Michael listened without interruption as she described Rosa welcoming her, the boys dragging her to play, the hours of simple joy that had quieted her panic more effectively than any medication. "Oliver, Miam, showed me a drawing of his family. He drew you, the 3 boys, your mother, and left an empty space next to you. He said it was for when you found someone to stay with you again." Victoria's voice cracked. "And that broke me, Michael. Because I realized I'm 40 years old, built an empire, have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, and my family drawing has no one. It's just me. It's always been just me." Michael felt his chest tighten, not from professional distance, but from recognizing her pain too intimately. "When they asked me to lie down with them until they fell asleep, I knew I should leave. I knew it was strange that you'd arrive and find this bizarre situation, but I couldn't refuse because how long has it been since anyone asked me to stay? How long since I felt that my presence matters to someone for real, not because of my position or my last name, but for who I am?" She wiped away tears that insisted on falling. And there in that bed with 3 boys I met today, being hugged like I was important, I understood. I finally understood what you'd been trying to show me in the sessions. The emptiness isn't lack of professional achievement. It's lack of this real connection, this human warmth, this feeling of belonging to something that goes beyond meetings and contracts and quarterly earnings. Michael set his mug on the coffee table and leaned forward slightly. Victoria, you don't need to justify yourself, and you definitely don't need to thank me. What happened here today, I think it was exactly what you needed. And my children clearly had a special afternoon with someone who genuinely cared about them. But I invaded your house, slept in your bed, appropriated your children. You didn't invade anything. My mother welcomed you. My children chose you. And that bed, to be honest, has had too much empty space for too long anyway. Victoria looked at him with surprise at the honesty in that last sentence. Michael held her gaze. Victoria, I don't know what happened here today in the bigger sense, but I know two lonely people found something real in an unexpected moment. That's not nothing. They sat in silence for several minutes. Not the uncomfortable silence of strangers, but the quiet of two people processing something significant, something that might change the trajectory of their lives if they let it. Can I ask you something? Victoria broke the stillness. Of course. How do you manage? Raising 3 boys alone, working full-time, still having energy to be present with them. Michael gave a tired smile. I don't manage most of the time. I function on autopilot, do what needs to be done, and fall apart when they're sleeping. My mother is my foundation. Without her, I don't know if I'd still be standing. But you're doing an incredible job. Those boys are well-adjusted, loving, happy. They are because they don't know their father still cries. That there are days I can barely get out of bed, but have to because they need me. That I'm so afraid of failing them that sometimes I freeze. Michael's voice dropped. But they don't see that. And it's better that way. Victoria reached across the table, and Michael took her hand without hesitation. You're not failing. On the contrary, you're giving them something many children never have. A father who shows up every day, even when it's hard. And you aren't lost just because you built a career instead of a traditional family. You're searching, which is different. And today, you found a piece of what you were looking for. That's not nothing. Their hands remained joined on the table, and in that touch existed something that transcended professional boundaries. Neither acknowledged it explicitly, but both felt the shift. Can I come back? Victoria's question emerged quietly, vulnerable. It doesn't have to be every week, but maybe one Saturday from time to time? To see the boys? Michael squeezed her hand gently. I think they'd love that. They asked about the pretty lady 90 times before falling asleep. She smiled through her tears. So, until next Saturday? Until next Saturday, Victoria. When she finally stood to leave, when they said goodbye at the door with a hug that lasted several seconds longer than friendship required, both knew that night had altered more than just an afternoon of playing. It had opened a door neither had known existed, one that led towards something neither could name yet, but both wanted to explore. Victoria drove back to her penthouse with the ghost sensation of small arms around her, the echo of children's laughter in her ears, and for the first time in months, the panic stayed quiet. She'd sought air to breathe and found an entire atmosphere. She'd sought escape from emptiness and stumbled into fullness. Michael returned to check on his sleeping sons, standing in the doorway of his bedroom, watching their peaceful faces. The house felt different now, like Victoria had left something invisible but tangible behind. Possibility, perhaps, or hope, or simply the reminder that his life didn't have to be defined entirely by loss. Rosa found him there 20 minutes later, still watching the boys sleep. She's good with them, Rosa observed. She is. But son, Be careful. Michael turned to face his mother. Careful of what? They're getting attached. And if she leaves... She won't leave, Mom. Rose's expression held the sorrow of experience. Everyone leaves, Michael. Sarah didn't choose to, but she left, and these boys can't handle another loss. The warning landed in Michael's chest with uncomfortable weight, but he pushed it aside. Victoria had found something precious in his home, in his children. She wouldn't abandon that. She couldn't. But standing in that doorway with his mother's concerns hanging in the air, Michael realized they'd crossed a line today that couldn't be uncrossed. Victoria Ashford wasn't just his patient anymore. She'd become something more complicated, something that scared him almost as much as it attracted him. He thought about Sarah's photo on his dresser, wondered what she'd think of this development, whether she'd approve or feel betrayed. The guilt that constantly gnawed at him flared bright. Was he replacing her? Was he allowed to feel this pull toward someone else? Did wanting Victoria in his life somehow diminish what he'd had with Sarah? The questions had no easy answers. So Michael did what he'd become expert at over 14 months of grief. He pushed them down, locked them away, and focused on the immediate. His boys were safe. Victoria had found peace. Tomorrow he'd return to his routine. Everything would be fine. Except deep in his gut, he knew nothing would ever be quite the same again. Victoria returned the following Saturday at 10 in the morning, carrying a children's book she'd bought during the week and a bag of ice cream that would almost certainly melt before they got around to eating it. The boys spotted her through the front window and erupted in chaos. 3 identical faces pressed against the glass, hands waving frantically, voices muffled but clearly shouting her name. Rosa opened the door before Victoria could ring the bell. The older woman's smile held warmth, but also assessment, the look of someone protecting her territory while remaining gracious. They've been asking about you since Monday. The boys swarmed Victoria the moment she stepped inside, all talking at once, pulling her in 3 different directions. Ethan wanted to show her the new block tower he'd designed. Liam had drawn a picture specifically for her. Noah demanded she see the rock collection he'd started in the backyard. Michael emerged from the kitchen with coffee, watching the scene unfold. Victoria caught his eye over the boys' heads, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe, or gratitude, or the simple recognition of 2 people who'd stumbled into something neither quite understood yet. The morning dissolved into controlled chaos. Building blocks became a castle, then a spaceship, then a restaurant where Victoria was forced to pretend eat plastic food while Ethan explained the menu with absolute seriousness. Liam sat close, occasionally reaching out to touch her arm as if confirming she was real. Noah crashed toy cars with sound effects that Victoria gamely attempted to replicate, earning delighted giggles when she got the engine noises wrong. By noon, they'd migrated to the backyard, where lunch happened at a picnic table Michael had dragged from the garage. Hot dogs and chips, and the ice cream Victoria brought, now properly melted, but still delicious according to 3 enthusiastic reviews. Food ended up everywhere except entirely in mouths, ketchup on shirts, chip crumbs in hair, melted ice cream dripping down chins. Victoria didn't flinch when Noah's juice box exploded across her silk blouse, the purple liquid spreading across fabric that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. The boys froze, eyes wide, waiting for anger that didn't come. It's just a shirt. Let's clean it up together, okay? Michael observed from the back door, coffee mug in hand, struck by the ease with which Victoria had adapted to chaos. This woman who commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar contracts was on her knees soaking up juice with paper towels, while Noah apologized in a tiny voice and she assured him accidents happen to everyone. But Michael also noticed his mother's expression, concerned, guarded, protective. Rosa was watching Victoria with the wariness of someone who'd seen her son devastated once and refused to let it happen again. Later, after the boys had been corralled into watching cartoons, Rosa pulled Michael into the kitchen. "She's wonderful with them." Michael heard the unspoken "but" hovering in the air. "And?" "They're getting attached, Michael, already. Ethan asked this morning if Miss Victoria was going to be their new mommy." The words hit harder than they should have. "What did you tell him?" "That she's Daddy's friend who likes to visit. But son, you need to be careful here."
Careful how? Rosa's eyes held the grief of her own losses. A husband gone 10 years now. A daughter-in-law buried 14 months ago. What happens when she gets bored? When the novelty wears off and she remembers she has a company to run, a life to live. These boys can't handle another person leaving them. "She's not going to leave, Mom." "You don't know that. Nobody knows that." Rosa gripped the edge of the counter. Love is easy when it's new and shiny. Staying is hard. And these boys, they've already learned that people they love disappear. Michael wanted to argue, to defend Victoria, to insist his mother was wrong. But doubt crept in, like cold water through cracks in a hull. What did he really know about Victoria beyond their therapy sessions and one extraordinary Saturday? People showed their best selves at the beginning. Reality came later when routine set in and novelty faded. The afternoon continued with Victoria unaware of the conversation in the kitchen. She stayed until after dinner, helping with the bedtime routine that surprised Michael with her natural competence. She read stories in different voices, tucked blankets with the perfect amount of firmness, kissed foreheads without hesitation. When the boys finally slept and Victoria prepared to leave, Michael walked her to her car. The evening air carried the first hint of autumn coolness. "Thank you for letting me come back." "You don't need to thank me every time." Michael leaned against her car, hands in his pockets. "I do, though. You can't imagine how different this week was, knowing I had this waiting at the end of it." Something in her voice made Michael's chest tighten, a loneliness so profound that these few hours with his children had become her lifeline. It should have felt flattering. Instead, it scared him. "Victoria, can I ask you something that might be too invasive?" "You can ask." "Why did you never have children? I mean, it's obvious you love this. Why did you let it pass?" She was quiet for long enough that Michael thought she might not answer. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of accumulated regrets. "Because I thought I had time. Because I prioritized the company. Because I never found someone who wanted children with me for the right reasons. They wanted the Ashford name, the money, the connections." She stared at the darkening sky. "And when I realized time was actually finite, when I went to that fertility specialist and learned my window had closed, I was already 40 and alone. It seemed too late." "It's not too late. Adoption, surrogacy, alone, Michael? At 40? With my work schedule?" Victoria's laugh held no humor. "What agency would approve me? I work 70 hours a week. I live in a penthouse that echoes. I have no partner, no support system, nothing that says good parent except money. And money is the one thing that doesn't actually qualify you to raise a child." Michael studied her profile in the streetlight. "You know I'm raising 3 alone, right?" "You weren't alone when they were born. You had a partner, had a plan. I'd be starting from zero, no reference, no instinct, no idea what I'm doing. It's different." "Different isn't impossible." Victoria turned to look at him directly, and something in her expression made Michael's pulse quicken. "Can I ask you something now?" Of course. Have you thought about having someone again? Not for the boys to have a mother figure, for you to have company, partnership, someone to share this life with? The question struck deep. Michael took a long time answering, watching his own breath fog in the cooling air. I think about it. Then I feel guilty, like it's betrayal. Like Sarah died last week instead of 14 months ago. And there are the boys to consider. How do I explain that someone new is going to appear? How do I guarantee this person won't leave and hurt them worse? You don't guarantee anything. Victoria's voice softened. Nobody guarantees anything in life. But that doesn't mean you have to stay trapped in grief forever. And you? Why did you never allow yourself to have someone for real? Someone who wanted you and not your empire? Because everyone wanted the Ashford heiress, not Victoria. They wanted access, connections, status. And when I couldn't separate what was real from what was interest anymore, I stopped trying. She wrapped her arms around herself. Must be lonely, people say. And yes, it is. But you know what's worse? Not realizing you're alone until you find something that reminds you what it feels like not to be. They looked at each other across the small space between them, and something unspoken filled the gap. Recognition, attraction, possibility. Neither was ready to name it, but both felt it like electricity in the air before a storm. These Saturdays have been the first thing I've looked forward to anxiously in years. Not because they're breaks from work, I like work, but because here I'm not the CEO. I'm not the heiress. I'm just me, and people here like me for that. Michael reached out and took her hand. The touch felt simultaneously natural and dangerous. You're welcome here whenever you want. Not as CEO, not as patient, as Victoria, the person my children adore and who He stopped, realizing he'd been about to say something too revealing too soon. Who you what? Her question came barely louder than breath. Who I like having around. The safer version, the one that didn't expose how much he'd thought about her this week, how many times he'd caught himself wanting to text her, how the house had felt emptier on the days between her visits. But Victoria's eyes said she understood what he hadn't spoken aloud.
The Saturdays became routine over the following weeks. Victoria arrived at 10, stayed through lunch, sometimes lingered until after dinner. The boys stopped asking when she'd visit and started planning what they'd do when she came. Rosa's cooking expanded to accommodate 4 adults instead of 2, though her worried glances at Michael continued. The boys' attachment deepened visibly. Ethan started saving his best drawings for Victoria. Liam asked her opinion on important matters, like which superhero was strongest. Noah, the most reserved of the 3, began seeking her out specifically when he was hurt or upset, wanting her comfort over everyone else's. Michael watched it happen with a mixture of joy and terror. His sons were healing, opening their hearts to someone new, but his mother's warning echoed constantly. What happens when she leaves? The shift began subtly. Conversations between Michael and Victoria grew longer, deeper, extending beyond the boys. Accidental touches became more frequent, hands brushing while reaching for the same toy, shoulders bumping in the narrow kitchen, fingers grazing when passing plates at dinner. Eye contact lasted seconds longer than necessary. One Tuesday evening, Michael sent a text before he could overthink it. Dinner tomorrow? Just the 2 of us. No kids, no therapy. Victoria's response came within minutes. Like a date?
Michael stared at his phone, heart pounding. Was it a date? Could it be? Should it be? Like two adults who could use conversation that doesn't involve dinosaurs or building blocks. Her reply, I'd like that. They met at a small Italian restaurant in the North End, far enough from the hospital to avoid running into colleagues. The booth in the back corner gave them privacy, candlelight flickering between them while they navigated the strange territory of being together without the boys or therapy as buffer. Talk flowed easily once they relaxed. Books they'd loved, movies that moved them, childhood stories that revealed who they'd been before life had shaped them into who they were now. Michael learned Victoria had wanted to be a veterinarian as a child, but bowed to family pressure to study business. Victoria discovered Michael had considered philosophy before choosing medicine, drawn to questions about meaning and existence. They carefully avoided certain topics: Sarah, Victoria's panic attacks, the boys, the future. This was an island outside normal life, a space where they could simply be two people enjoying each other's company. 3 hours passed like 30 minutes. The restaurant staff began cleaning around them before they noticed the time. In the parking lot, saying goodbye felt awkward in a way that hadn't existed at Michael's house. Victoria moved in for a hug, and it lasted longer than friendship warranted. Michael's arms tightened around her, and he breathed in the scent of her perfume mixed with something uniquely her. When they separated, the air between them felt charged. Same time next week? Michael's voice came out rougher than intended. I'd like that very much. They almost kissed. Both leaned in slightly, caught themselves, pulled back. Not yet. Not while everything remained so complicated and undefined. But driving home separately, both smiled in their cars, feeling something that resembled hope. The Tuesday dinners became routine alongside the Saturday visits. Weeks turned into months. Hand-holding graduated from accidental to intentional. Goodbye hugs extended until they bordered on embrace. Goodnight kisses materialized, chaste, brief, but unmistakably romantic. Neither pushed for more. Michael's guilt about Sarah resurfaces regularly, manifesting in dreams where she asked him why he was replacing her, why she wasn't enough, why he'd moved on so quickly. He'd wake in cold sweats, gripped by the certainty that loving Victoria somehow diminished what he'd had with Sarah. Victoria battled her own demons. Late at night in her penthouse, she'd question whether she actually loved Michael or simply loved the escape he represented. Did she want him, or did she want his ready-made family? Would she feel this pull toward him if he didn't come with 3 boys who filled the child-shaped void in her life? The questions had no clear answers, so they moved forward cautiously, building something neither could quite name. By month 4, Victoria had a drawer in Michael's bedroom. Not because anyone had suggested it, but because she spent enough evenings there that keeping a change of clothes made practical sense. She'd help with bedtime, stay for adult conversation after the boys slept, sometimes doze on the couch during a movie, and wake to Michael covering her with a blanket. The boys adapted seamlessly. Ethan declared Victoria should live with them permanently. Liam asked why she had her own house when she could just stay in theirs. Noah, with 4-year-old bluntness, asked, "Are you going to be our new mommy?" Victoria had frozen, looking to Michael for guidance. He'd knelt to Noah's eye level, voice gentle but firm. Victoria is someone very special to all of us, but she's not replacing your mommy. Your mommy will always be your mommy. Victoria is Victoria. Noah had seemed satisfied with that non-answer, but the question lingered in the air, unanswered, but not forgotten. The cracks in their careful balance started showing in week 6 of Victoria's visits. Noah, who'd been warming to her steadily, suddenly became hostile. He threw toys when she arrived, refused to play with her, hid in closets when she tried to engage. The transformation was dramatic and disturbing. Ethan and Liam were baffled.
Noah, why are you being mean to Miss Victoria? Noah's response came with tears and fury. She's not Mommy. I want Mommy. Make her go away. Victoria tried everything, giving him space, offering his favorite activities, attempting gentle conversation. Nothing worked. Noah's rejection was absolute and devastating. Michael discovered the trigger after a conference with Noah's preschool teacher. The class had done a Mother's Day craft project, and Noah had created a card for Mommy in the Stars. The teacher had gently suggested he might want to give it to someone else who took care of him, maybe his grandmother or another special person. Noah had come home convinced that if he gave the card to Victoria, he'd be erasing Sarah completely. His 4-year-old logic couldn't hold both. His dead mother in the stars and this living woman in their house. Accepting Victoria meant betraying Sarah's memory. Michael sat with Noah that evening, pulling him into his lap despite the boy's resistance. Buddy, Victoria isn't replacing Mommy. Nobody can replace Mommy. But Ethan says he wishes she was our new Mommy. And you smile at her like you smiled at Mommy in the pictures. The accusation hit like a fist. Michael's throat tightened. Noah, I loved your Mommy more than anything. But she's gone, and she's not coming back. That doesn't mean I can't care about other people. I don't want to care about other people. I want Mommy back. Noah dissolved into sobs, the kind of grief-stricken crying that couldn't be comforted, only weathered. Michael held him while his own tears fell silently. These boys had lost so much, and now they were being asked to open their hearts again, to risk loving someone who might leave. It was too much to ask of anyone, let alone children who'd already learned that love meant loss. Victoria overheard from the hallway. She'd come upstairs to help with bedtime and found herself eavesdropping on a conversation that shattered her. She found Michael in the kitchen an hour later, after Noah had finally cried himself to sleep. I'm making this worse. I should stop coming. Michael leaned against the counter, exhausted. This is grief, Victoria. It has to come out. Better now than years from now, when it's hardened into something toxic. But Noah is right. I'm not their mother. I don't know how to be what they need. I don't know how to navigate this. Victoria's voice cracked. I'm a 40-year-old woman who's never had children, never been married, never even had a serious relationship that lasted more than 6 months. I run a billion-dollar company, but I can't handle a 4-year-old's grief. Michael moved closer, capturing her hands. Victoria, I don't know how to handle it either. I wake up every day terrified I'm failing them. I'm a psychiatrist who can't fix his own son's trauma. We're both fumbling in the dark here. But you're their father, and I still don't have the answers. Sarah was the one who understood their emotional needs, who knew instinctively how to soothe their fears. I'm just a guy who loves them desperately and hopes that's enough. They stood in the kitchen, bound by shared inadequacy and fear. For the first time, they'd acknowledged the truth. Neither had any idea what they were doing, but both were trying anyway. The vulnerability drew them together. Michael pulled Victoria into an embrace that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with mutual need. Two people drowning in different ways, finding someone else who understood what it meant to be unable to breathe. I'm scared, Victoria whispered against his shoulder. Me too. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other up. Week 8 brought Michael's text proposing Tuesday dinner for just the two of them. Week 10 brought another. By week 16, the pattern was established. Saturdays with the family, Tuesdays with each other. The relationship deepened without either acknowledging it explicitly. They were dating, though neither used that word. They were falling for each other, though neither spoke it aloud. They were building towards something serious while pretending they were just enjoying each other's company. Michael found himself comparing Victoria to Sarah in quiet moments, immediately feeling guilty for it. Sarah had been warm, spontaneous, comfortable with mess and chaos. Victoria was controlled, precise, needed structure. Sarah had laughed easily and cried openly. Victoria guarded her emotions behind professional walls that only occasionally cracked. Were those differences good or bad? Michael didn't know. He just knew that when Victoria smiled at him, something in his chest loosened. When she wasn't around, the house felt emptier than it had before she'd started coming. But was that love, or just loneliness seeking comfort? Victoria's own internal battle raged constantly. She'd catch herself planning her week around Saturday, feeling genuine excitement about spending time with the boys. But then doubt would creep in. Did she love Michael? Or did she love what he represented? Family, belonging, purpose beyond profit margins. If Michael didn't have the boys, would she even be interested in him? The question haunted her because she couldn't answer it honestly. Month 4 brought another shift. Victoria started staying later on Saturdays, helping with dinner, participating in bedtime routines with increasing confidence. She learned that Ethan needed extra cuddles before sleep, that Liam required his stuffed elephant positioned exactly right, that Noah wanted the closet door open precisely 6 inches. Rosa watched it all with hawk eyes, her concern morphing into something closer to approval, but never quite reaching acceptance. She pulled Michael aside one evening after Victoria left. "She's good for you." Michael heard the unspoken but again. Why does that sound like the beginning of a warning? Because love is easy in the beginning. Bills and sick kids and ordinary life, that's when you find out who stays and who runs. You think Victoria would run? Rosa's expression softened. I think she's never been tested. When things get hard, when the boys are screaming and the money's tight and life is just grinding routine instead of special Saturdays, I don't know if she'll stay. Neither do you. Michael wanted to defend Victoria, but his mother's point landed. They'd been existing in a bubble where Victoria showed up for the good parts, playtime, laughter, bonding moments. Real life involved tantrums and illness and exhaustion and conflict. Could Victoria handle that? Would she want to? The answer came sooner than expected. One Saturday, Noah spilled an entire cup of juice across Victoria's designer blouse. Not the accidental splash from weeks ago, but a full-on dump that soaked her from collar to waist. The boys held their breath, waiting for the anger. Victoria's face tightened. For a moment, Michael saw the CEO beneath the surface, the woman used to control and order. Then she breathed deliberately and forced a smile. It's fine. Accidents happen. Let's clean it up. But her voice held an edge that hadn't been there before. The smile didn't reach her eyes. And when Noah apologized in a tiny voice, Victoria's response came out clipped, professional. It's okay, Noah. Just be more careful next time. The warmth had drained from the interaction, replaced by polite distance. Michael saw it. Rosa saw it. The boys felt it. The afternoon limped along with Victoria trying to recapture her earlier ease, but not quite managing it. She left earlier than usual, claiming a headache. The goodbye hug with Michael felt perfunctory. After she drove away, Rosa spoke the thought Michael was avoiding. That's what happens when the real world intrudes.
People show you who they really are. Michael wanted to argue, but doubt had taken root. Tuesday's dinner felt strained. Victoria apologized for leaving early Saturday, blamed stress from work. Michael accepted the excuse but sensed something had shifted. They were both trying too hard, overcompensating, aware of new fragility in whatever they were building. "Can I ask you something that might be too personal?" Victoria's question came over dessert. "We're a bit past worrying about personal, aren't we? Do you think about having someone again? Not for the boys, for yourself. Companionship, partnership, love." Michael set down his fork, buying time. "I think about it constantly. Then guilt crashes in and tells me it's betrayal. Like Sarah's been dead for 5 minutes instead of 14 months.
And there are the boys. How do I introduce someone new into their lives? How do I promise them this person won't leave when I can't guarantee it myself?" Victoria's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "You can't guarantee anything. Life is risk. But that doesn't mean you have to stay frozen in grief forever." "I know that logically. Emotionally is different." Michael paused. "What about you? Why have you never let yourself be vulnerable with someone? Let them see past the CEO to who Victoria actually is?" "Because people always wanted the wrong things. The money, the connections, the Ashford name. I could never separate genuine interest from strategic positioning. So I stopped trying." She looked directly at him. "Must be lonely, people say. And yes, it is. But you know what's worse than being alone? Not realizing you're alone until you find something that shows you what not being alone feels like." The conversation was circling something neither wanted to name. They were talking about each other without talking about each other, testing waters without diving in. The evening ended with their longest kiss yet, still chaste, still restrained, but carrying months of accumulated longing. When they separated, both were breathing harder. "What are we doing, Victoria?" Her answer came after a long pause. "I don't know, but I don't want to stop." "Neither do I." But driving home separately, both wrestled with the same questions. What were they building? Where was this going? And could it possibly work given how complicated everything was? Month 5 arrived with Victoria more integrated into their lives than ever. She had her toothbrush in Michael's bathroom, her coffee mug in the cabinet, her favorite spot on the couch. The boys had stopped asking when she'd visit and started assuming she'd be there. But tensions were building beneath the surface. Victoria's controlling nature, suppressed for months, started emerging. She rearranged the playroom to be more organized. She suggested healthier snack options. She questioned Michael's bedtime routine as inconsistent. The first real argument erupted over something trivial: the boys eating ice cream before dinner. "That's not healthy. They should have vegetables first, establish good eating habits." Rosa's response was immediate and sharp. "Sometimes sugar and joy are more important than perfect nutrition." Victoria bristled. "I'm just trying to help establish structure." "Help or control?" Rosa's question cut deep. Michael watched the exchange, seeing his mother defend her territory and Victoria struggle with relinquishing the command that defined her entire life. Later, after the boys were asleep, Victoria and Michael talked in the backyard. "I'm sorry. I overstepped. You're used to running things, making decisions, optimizing systems. But they're children, not employees." Michael kept his voice gentle but firm. "They need flexibility, spontaneity, room to be messy and imperfect. I don't know how to not be the CEO. It's all I've ever been." Victoria's admission carried real pain. I walk into any situation and immediately start identifying problems and implementing solutions. It's automatic. Then learn to turn it off, because control kills joy, and these boys need joy more than they need optimization. Victoria nodded, but Michael saw the struggle in her eyes. Could she change something so fundamental to who she was? Did she even want to? The warning signs were there, but both chose to ignore them, too invested in what they were building to acknowledge the cracks in the foundation. Month 5 brought the crisis neither had anticipated. The board meeting summons arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Dr. Michael Torres was requested to appear before the Ashford Healthcare Network Ethics Committee the following Tuesday at 9 a.m. No explanation provided, no charges listed, just the cold professional directive that turned his blood to ice. Victoria received her own notification simultaneously, delivered by her assistant with apologetic eyes. The board required her presence at the same meeting to discuss potential conflicts of interest regarding her relationship with an employee. Michael called her immediately, voice tight with controlled panic. "What is this?" "Richard Sterling." Victoria's response came clipped, furious. "He's making his move." Richard Sterling, CFO of Ashford Healthcare for the past decade, had wanted Victoria's position since her grandfather died. He'd been passed over for a younger woman with less experience. Never mind that the younger woman was the founder's granddaughter, Harvard-educated and brilliant. Richard had nursed his resentment quietly, waiting for ammunition. The relationship between the CEO and a staff psychiatrist was precisely the weapon he needed. The meeting room on Tuesday felt designed for intimidation. Massive mahogany table, leather chairs that swallowed occupants, walls lined with portraits of stern-faced medical pioneers. 7 board members sat in judgment. Richard Sterling occupied the seat closest to the head of the table, his smile sharp as surgical steel. Michael entered first. Victoria 10 minutes later, as protocol demanded. They weren't allowed to sit together. The distance felt deliberate, symbolic. Richard opened with clinical precision. "We're here to address concerns about a relationship between Ms. Victoria Ashford, CEO of this network, and Dr. Michael Torres, employee of St. Grace Medical Center. This relationship creates substantial conflict of interest, raises questions about favoritism, and exposes the organization to potential legal liability. Dr. Torres could claim coercion or inappropriate leverage. Ms. Ashford's judgment regarding personnel decisions may be compromised. The appearance of impropriety damages institutional integrity regardless of actual misconduct." Victoria's response came in full CEO mode, voice arctic and unyielding. "Dr. Torres is not my subordinate. He reports to the chief of psychiatry, who reports to the hospital administrator, who reports to regional operations. I have no direct authority over his employment, salary, or advancement. Furthermore, my personal life is not board business unless it demonstrably affects company performance. Since taking this position, I've overseen 23% revenue growth, expanded services to underserved communities, and improved patient satisfaction scores across all facilities. My personal relationships have zero impact on those metrics." Richard's smile widened. "Then you won't object to signing this agreement?" He slid documents across the table. Michael scanned the terms, each one a carefully crafted trap. Mandatory third-party oversight of all performance evaluations involving Dr. Torres. Any promotion, raise, or disciplinary action subject to external review. If the relationship ends adversely, one party must resign from the network within 30 days. Both parties acknowledge potential conflicts and agree to heightened scrutiny of all professional interactions. Victoria's jaw tightened. Refusing would validate Richard's concerns about the relationship's seriousness. Signing would place Michael's career in permanent jeopardy, held hostage to their personal life. Before she could respond, Michael spoke. "I'll sign.
Michael, no. I'm not letting them use me as leverage against you. His voice carried steel beneath the calm. To Richard, but let's be clear about what's actually happening here. You're not protecting the company, you're protecting your ambition. Everyone in this room knows you want her position.
This is sabotage dressed as ethics. Richard's expression never shifted. Then prove me wrong. Stay together for 6 months without incident. If you can manage that without damaging the organization, perhaps these concerns are unfounded. The meeting ended with signatures on documents that felt like shackles. Walking out separately, protocol again, Michael felt the weight of every eye in that hallway. Word would spread through the hospital by lunch. The CEO's secret relationship, now public knowledge, subject to institutional scrutiny. Victoria caught up to him in the parking garage, her heels echoing sharply off concrete. I could have handled that. By sacrificing what? Us? Your position? Michael's frustration boiled over. That agreement is designed to make you choose between your career and this relationship. There is no us. We're not even official. We haven't defined anything. We're just... What the hell have we been doing for 5 months, Victoria? What do you call these Tuesday dinners and Saturday routines and the drawer in my bedroom? She recoiled as if struck. I call it complicated. I call it undefined. I call it something I can't name because naming it makes it real, and real things can hurt me. Michael stared at her, seeing the walls rebuilt in real time. You're running again. I'm being realistic. This was always impossible. CEO and employee, billionaire and middle-class doctor, woman with no family and man with 3 sons. We were playing house, pretending the real world didn't exist. Now it does, and we have to face that maybe this was a mistake from the beginning. She walked to her car, each step deliberate, controlled. Michael watched her go, recognizing the retreat for what it was. Victoria Ashford choosing the empire over the risk, choosing safety over vulnerability. The following Saturday, Victoria texted that she couldn't make it. Work emergency. The boys' disappointment cut deeper than Michael expected. Ethan asked if they'd done something wrong. Liam wondered if she was sick. Noah, surprisingly, was the most vocal. I want Miss Victoria. Tuesday's dinner was canceled via text. Work crisis, investor concerns, board complications. Michael didn't push. He understood the message. Victoria was pulling away, creating distance, protecting herself the only way she knew how. By the 3rd week of her absence, the boys had stopped asking. They'd learned this pattern before. People you loved disappeared. The silence in the house felt heavier than before Victoria arrived, like they'd been given a glimpse of fullness only to have it revoked. Rosa found Michael in the kitchen late one night, staring at his phone like it might spontaneously generate a message from Victoria. She's scared. She's gone, Mom. There's a difference. Rosa poured 2 glasses of whiskey, a rare occurrence that signaled serious conversation. Scared people run, but sometimes they come back once they realize what they're running from isn't as dangerous as what they're running toward. And if she doesn't come back, then you know she wasn't strong enough for this life. Better to find out now than after the boys are more attached, after you've built something that can't be easily dismantled. Michael sipped the whiskey, letting it burn. I think I'm already attached, Mom. I think I've been attached since the day I found her sleeping with my sons, looking more at peace than I'd ever seen her. Then you have to decide. Do you fight for her, or do you let her go? The answer should have been simple, but Michael was tired of fighting, tired of trying, tired of hoping things could be different. If Victoria wanted to walk away, maybe he should let her.
Week 3 became week 4.
Michael threw himself into work with renewed intensity, taking extra shifts, volunteering for the cases other psychiatrists avoided. Anything to avoid thinking about the empty space Victoria had left behind. Then Rosa collapsed in the kitchen on a Monday morning while making breakfast. Michael heard the crash from upstairs, where he'd been getting the boys ready for preschool. He ran down to find his mother on the floor, conscious but disoriented, the right side of her face drooping slightly. Stroke. The word screamed through his medical training, even as panic short-circuited rational thought. The ambulance ride, the emergency room admission, the rapid imaging that confirmed ischemic stroke. It all happened in a blur of professional competence masking personal terror. The boys, dropped with a neighbor in chaos, kept calling his phone. Is Grandma going to die like Mommy? Surgery was necessary to remove the clot, the neurosurgeon explained. Insurance covered 60%. Out-of-pocket cost, $47,000. Michael's brain stuttered on the number. He was still paying off Sarah's cancer treatment. His savings had been decimated by 14 months of single-income household with 3 children. He didn't have $47,000. He didn't have $20,000. He barely had 5. He could take a loan, but banks didn't give favorable terms to people already carrying 6-figure medical debt. The surgery needed to happen within hours for optimal outcomes. He had no time and no options. Sitting in the ICU waiting room at 3 a.m, watching through the glass as surgeons worked on his mother, Michael felt the universe pressing down with unbearable weight. The boys needed him. His mother needed him. He was drowning, and there was no one to pull him up. Victoria learned about Rosa's stroke from the hospital administrator. Protocol required notifying the CEO of any employee family emergencies that might affect work attendance. She was in a meeting with investors when the notification arrived, and she felt the blood drain from her face reading the clinical summary. The meeting continued around her, voices discussing quarterly projections and expansion strategies. But Victoria heard none of it. Her mind was in that ICU, imagining Michael's terror, the boys' fear, Rosa's fragile mortality. She excused herself with bare apologies and drove to St. Grace Medical Center, breaking multiple traffic laws in the process. Finding Michael was easy. He sat alone in the ICU waiting room, still wearing yesterday's clothes, unshaven, hollow-eyed. The boys were nowhere visible. Michael. He looked up, and for a moment something like relief crossed his face, before it hardened into something colder. What are you doing here? I heard about Rosa. Is she... She's in surgery, and I don't have time for this conversation right now. Victoria sat anyway, maintaining careful distance. I can cover the costs. No. Michael, don't be stubborn. I said no. I don't need your charity. It's not charity, it's... She stopped, searching for words that wouldn't sound condescending. It's what people do for people they care about. We're not people who care about each other, Victoria. You made that abundantly clear when you disappeared for a month. His voice was flat, exhausted beyond emotion. You were right that day in the parking garage. This was always impossible. We were playing house, pretending reality didn't exist. Now reality exists, and I can't afford to have you in my life making it more complicated. That's not fair. Fair? Michael's laugh held no humor. You walked away the moment things got difficult. The board put pressure on us, and you ran. That's who you are. Someone who runs when reality intrudes on the fantasy. Before Victoria could respond, noise erupted down the hallway. Noah's voice, followed by Ethan and Liam, all 3 boys breaking away from the nurse who'd been watching them and running toward the waiting room. Noah saw Victoria first. Miss Victoria! He slammed into her with the full force of his small body, arms wrapping around her waist, face buried against her stomach. The impact nearly knocked her over. Liam and Ethan followed immediately, all three boys talking at once, crying, grabbing at her like she was a life raft in stormy seas. "We missed you! Where did you go? Grandma's sick and we're scared." But it was Noah who broke her. Noah, whose next words came out in a sob that shattered every wall Victoria had rebuilt. "Don't leave again. Please don't leave like Mommy and Grandma. Please stay. Please." Victoria sank to her knees, gathering all three boys against her, and the tears she'd been holding back for a month came flooding out. Not delicate tears, ugly, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I left. I was scared and stupid, and I hurt you, and I'm so sorry." She looked up at Michael over the boys' heads, and he saw something in her expression he'd never witnessed before. Complete, unguarded vulnerability. The CEO armor was gone. The controlled facade had shattered. This was just Victoria, raw and broken and terrified. "I'm not leaving again. I'm staying. You can hate me for disappearing. You can refuse my help with the medical bills. You can tell me I'm not welcome in your life anymore. But I'm not leaving these boys. I'm not leaving you. I'm done running." Michael wanted to stay angry, wanted to maintain the protective distance that kept him from being hurt again. But watching Victoria on her knees, surrounded by his sobbing sons, seeing her own tears mixing with theirs, something in his chest cracked wide open. The waiting room nurse approached tentatively. "Dr. Torres, the surgeon is asking for you." Michael stood, looked at Victoria and the boys tangled together on the floor, and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "Stay with them. Please. I'll be back." Rosa's surgery succeeded. The clot was removed, blood flow restored, damage minimized by the rapid intervention. She'd need extensive rehabilitation, but the prognosis was favorable. Michael returned to the waiting room an hour later to find Victoria still on the floor with the boys, all four of them asleep in an exhausted pile, her arms around them even in unconsciousness. He sat down beside them and put his hand on Victoria's shoulder. She stirred, eyes opening slowly. "She's okay. She's going to be okay." Victoria's face crumpled with relief. Fresh tears came, quieter now, grateful. "Thank God." "About the money. I'm setting up a trust through the hospital foundation. Anonymous donor. You'll never know if it's from me or not, so you can't refuse it." Her voice was fierce despite the tears. "And before you argue, know that I'm done letting pride stand in the way of doing what's right. Your mother needs care. Your boys need their grandmother. I can help, and I'm going to help. And you can be angry about it, but you can't stop me." Michael studied her for a long moment. "You're infuriating." "I know. And I love you anyway." The words hung in the air between them, finally spoken after months of dancing around the truth. Victoria's breath caught. "You love me?" "I've loved you since the day I found you in my bed with my sons, looking more at peace than I'd ever seen you. I've loved you through every Tuesday dinner and Saturday afternoon. I loved you when you were here, and I loved you when you left, and I love you now, even though you make me crazy."
Victoria's hand found his. I love you too. Not the life you offer, not the escape from my emptiness. You. Michael Torres, the man who found me hyperventilating in a hallway and refused to let me drown. The father who cries in the shower because he's terrified of failing his sons. The widower who's brave enough to love again despite the guilt. I love all of you, including the broken parts. They sat in the waiting room holding hands, 3 sleeping boys piled between them, and acknowledged what had been true from the beginning. They belonged together, complications and all. The following weeks brought new routines. Victoria worked from Michael's house 2 days a week, laptop open at the kitchen table, while Rosa recovered upstairs. She hired the best physical therapists, arranged for home health aides, made sure Rosa received everything she needed, without making it obvious the money came from Ashford coffers. The boys adapted seamlessly to Victoria's increased presence. She was there for breakfast chaos and bedtime rituals, homework help, and playground visits. She learned to let go of control, to embrace mess and spontaneity, to find joy in the disorder that defined life with 3 4-year-olds. Rosa, confined to bed during early recovery, had extensive time to observe. She watched Victoria struggle with patience when the boys fought, saw her bite back controlling impulses when things didn't go according to plan, witnessed her learning, adapting, becoming someone who could thrive in the beautiful mess of family life. One afternoon, Rosa called Victoria to her bedroom for private conversation. You came back. Victoria sat beside the bed, taking Rosa's hand carefully. The right side still had reduced sensation. I should never have left. You were scared. Terrified. Of failing them, of not being enough, of proving everyone right who said I wasn't cut out for this. Victoria's thumb traced circles on Rosa's palm. But being away was worse than being scared. Nothing in my life meant anything without them. Rosa studied her with eyes that missed nothing. Do you love my son? Yes, more than I knew I could love anyone. Enough to stay when it's hard? When it's not special Saturdays and Tuesday dinners, but sick kids and tight money and grinding routine. Victoria met her eyes directly. I'm not going anywhere. Ever. I know you don't fully trust me yet, and I don't blame you, but I'm going to prove it through action, not words. I'm here for the long term, the hard parts, all of it. Rosa squeezed her hand weakly. Then welcome to the family, Victoria. Because that's what we do. We stay. The tears came again, but these were different. These were tears of acceptance, of belonging, of finally finding home. Month 6 arrived with Victoria and Michael's relationship no longer secret or undefined. The board had watched for scandal and found none. Richard Sterling, realizing his play had failed, submitted his resignation and took a position with a competing network. The ethics agreement remained in place, but the threat had dissolved. Hospital gossip still swirled. The CEO and the psychiatrist, the billionaire and the single dad, the unlikely romance that defied every expectation. Some whispered about gold digging, despite the economics making no sense. Others speculated about how long it would last. Michael and Victoria ignored it all. They were too busy building something real to care about commentary from people who didn't matter. The proposal happened on a random Thursday evening, not because Michael planned it, but because the moment felt right. They were in the backyard after the boys' bedtime, sitting on the porch steps, drinking wine and talking about nothing important. Rosa was upstairs, recovered enough to need minimal assistance. The night air carried autumn coolness and the scent of dying leaves. 8 months ago, you showed up at my door in the middle of a panic attack. Victoria smiled. Not my finest moment. You found my boys, or they found you. I'm still not sure which. Michael took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. And you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. The ability to imagine a future that isn't just survival. The courage to love again despite the guilt and fear. Michael, I loved Sarah. I'll always love her. But she's gone. And you're here. And I don't want to spend another day pretending you're just visiting. I don't want you to have a drawer in my room. I want you to have half the closet. I don't want Tuesday dinners as dates. I want you at my table every night. He pulled a ring from his pocket. Simple, elegant, not expensive by Victoria standards, but purchased with his own money. Significant for what it represented, rather than what it cost. I'm not offering you money or status or ease. I'm offering 3 loud boys, a mother-in-law who lives with us, a house that needs repairs, and a man who still cries sometimes. I'm offering medical debt and tight budgets and chaos. But I'm also offering real love, the kind that builds life instead of just avoiding loneliness. Victoria's tears were already falling. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to marry all of us. Me, the boys, Rosa, the whole complicated package. He slipped the ring onto her finger. Will you? She pulled him close, kissing him with all the pent-up emotion of 8 months of building toward this moment. When they separated, her answer came through tears and laughter mixed together. Yes, 1,000 times yes. But Michael, I'm keeping my name and my job and my terrible control issues. I know. I'm marrying you, not trying to fix you. Good, because I'm marrying you, not the perfect memory of your wife. I'm marrying the real, complicated, still grieving man who's brave enough to love again. They sat on those steps until well past midnight, planning a future that would be messy and complicated and absolutely worth it. The boys learned about the engagement the next morning over pancakes, Rosa's recipe, Victoria's execution. Michael supervising while 3 boys created disaster zones with syrup. So we have something important to tell you guys. 3 sets of identical eyes looked up, syrup sticky faces waiting. Victoria took over, voice steadier than she felt. Your dad asked me to marry him, and I said yes. That means I'm going to live here with you, be part of your family, officially. How do you feel about that? Ethan's response came immediately. Does that mean you're our new mommy? Victoria knelt down to his eye level, bringing herself to all 3 boys. I won't ever replace your mommy. She'll always be your mommy, the one who gave birth to you, who loved you first, who watches over you from the stars. I'm just Victoria, who loves you very much and wants to be part of your life. Is that okay? Liam's question was practical. Will you still do the funny voices when you read stories? Every single night. Noah's contribution surprised everyone. I love you, Victoria. First time he'd said it. First time he'd chosen her voluntarily, without prompting. Victoria pulled all 3 boys into a hug, overwhelmed by the simple acceptance of children who'd decided she was theirs. I love you too. All 3 of you. So much. Michael watched his sons embrace the woman who had become their stepmother and felt the guilt about Sarah finally recede. Not disappear. He'd always carry some measure of it. But now it shared space with gratitude for second chances, for unexpected love, for the courage to build something new on the foundation of what he'd lost. The wedding happened 6 months later in their backyard, the same space where Michael had proposed, where the boys played daily, where Victoria had learned to let go of control and embrace chaos. Small ceremony, 30 guests. Rosa recovered enough to walk without assistance. The boys served as ring bearers, creating predictable chaos that made everyone laugh. Catherine Ashford attended in silence, her presence a grudging peace offering that Victoria accepted without demanding more. Michael's vows were simple. I vow to let you run the hospital, but not our home. To love you when you're brilliant and when you're impossible. To share my children, my life, and my heart with you for as long as we both live. Victoria's response came with tears and laughter mixed. I vow to learn to let go, to choose family over empire when it matters most, to love your sons as fiercely as I love you, and to never, ever run away again. I'm staying, Michael, through everything, forever. The boys cheered when they kissed, Noah shouting, "Ew!" loud enough to make everyone laugh. At the reception, catered simply, decorations homemade by 3 enthusiastic 4-year-olds, Ethan presented Victoria with a drawing, the same family picture from months ago, but now filled in. No empty space beside Michael. Victoria stood there in crayon glory, arms around all 3 boys, smile as wide as her face. You're in the picture now. Forever. Victoria framed that drawing and hung it in her office at Ashford Healthcare, a reminder of what actually mattered when the corporate world tried to convince her otherwise. 1 year after that first Saturday, when Victoria showed up desperate and drowning, Michael woke to the familiar scene. Victoria asleep beside him, 3 boys piled onto the bed during their Saturday morning cartoon tradition. But now Victoria was his wife. The boys called her Mom sometimes, Victoria other times, whatever felt right in the moment. Rosa lived with them still, healthy and active, the grandmother glue that held everything together. The house was louder, messier, more chaotic than Michael had ever imagined wanting. And it was perfect. Victoria had reduced her work hours, still CEO, still driven, but home for dinner 4 nights a week. She'd learned to delegate, to trust her team, to define success by bedtime stories read and family dinners shared, rather than solely by profit margins. The panic attacks had stopped completely. Turned out what she'd needed all along wasn't medication or therapy or meditation. It was belonging. Purpose that extended beyond boardrooms. Love that asked nothing except that she show up. Michael still talked to Sarah's photo occasionally, but the conversations had changed. Less guilt, more gratitude. Thank you for the boys. Thank you for teaching me how to love. I hope you'd approve of who I chose to love next. Victoria woke to find Michael watching her, that soft expression on his face that she'd learned meant he was feeling grateful. What are you thinking? That 3 years ago, I found a billionaire CEO sleeping in my bed with my sons and thought the universe had lost its mind. She smiled. And now? Now I know it was the universe trying to save both of us. He kissed her softly, while 3 boys began stirring around them. You came looking for air and found a family. I came looking for escape and found purpose. Victoria pulled him closer as small bodies began demanding attention. We both came looking for nothing and found everything. The morning dissolved into beautiful chaos. Boys bouncing on the bed, demands for Saturday pancakes, Victoria trying to impose order while Michael encouraged disorder, Rosa's laughter floating up from downstairs where she'd started breakfast. This was life now. Messy, loud, complicated, exhausting, absolutely perfect. Victoria had built a $2.3 billion empire and discovered it meant nothing compared to this. 3 boys who needed her, a man who loved her, a family who'd chosen her. She'd spent 40 years searching for fulfillment in all the wrong places, climbing mountains that left her empty at the summit. Turned out what she needed was right here all along, in a modest house in suburban Boston, in the arms of 3 children who didn't care about her money, with a man who loved her not despite her flaws, but including them. Michael had survived 14 months of grief by functioning on autopilot, convinced he'd never feel whole again.
Victoria had shown him that wholeness didn't require forgetting the past. It required making space for the future while honoring what came before. They'd both been drowning in different oceans, and somehow they'd found each other and learned to swim. Saturday mornings stretched ahead with no schedule, no demands, nothing but time together. 3 boys and 2 adults tangled in blankets, laughing at cartoons, eating pancakes that Rosa brought upstairs on a tray, existing in the perfect imperfection of family life. Victoria had finally stopped running. Michael had finally stopped merely surviving. Together, they'd built something neither could have created alone. A blended family born from loss and loneliness, held together by love and stubborn hope. The rest would come. Challenges and conflicts, hard days and harder nights, all the complications of merging lives and raising children and navigating 2 careers. But they'd face it together, and that made all the difference. 3 years ago, on an ordinary Saturday night, Michael Torres had opened his bedroom door and found the impossible. Today, it was simply home.